Hello, everyone. I'm Don Pratt, host of a show here on Rogers TV where we give you a perspective of police in your community. Welcome to Policing York Region. Today, we're going to continue our conversation with the Organized Crime Bureau. At the request of Deputy Chief Brian Bigra, he'd asked if we would do an oversight of what the Organized Crime Bureau does within York Regional Police. We've had some great opportunity with fraud and with auto and cargo theft. And today, we're going to delve into a little bit of the organized crime under guns, gangs, and drug enforcement. Detective Sergeant Doug Bedford.
Yes.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So can you just give me an oversight of what your unit actually does then?
So I'm one of two supervisors that oversees the gun, gang, and drug enforcement unit. Okay. And essentially we have four teams that do just that. They do investigate organized crime issues and investigations in relation to guns, gangs, right, and a lot of drug enforcement.
So this is a big piece to the Organized Crime Bureau then?
It's a significant piece, yes, because with organized crime, a lot of their illicit gains are through, you know, the sale of drugs or frauds or using gangs to move the drugs. So yeah, there's a lot of interconnectivity between all of those areas, and that's why we kind of have it under one umbrella.
It really makes sense because, you know, it's not, bad guys aren't just one element, are they?
No, they're business people, and they diversify just like anybody else.
Yeah. So I mean, today's show is really mostly about we want to talk about cannabis and what's, you know, we've had a lot of conversation over the last year about cannabis, and it's not a conversation that's going to go away. It's kind of here to stay, and that's a large part of your role.
Yes, we certainly, since last October when the legalization, the Cannabis Act kicked in, it really hasn't changed our role other than, if anything, it's probably increased our role in relation to cannabis enforcement.
In what way?
Well, it's the government and the politicians stated that, you know, this whole legalization piece would eliminate organized crime. It would take away that organized crime market. Right?
Yeah.
Sadly, that hasn't happened. It's completely the opposite. It's actually created a very lucrative black market for organized crime.
No, that's what I've been reading, is that, if anything, it did the organized crime folks a good thing by giving them more opportunities.
Yeah, I don't know, but more opportunities. There's always been a large organized crime component in the cannabis market when it was illegal. Yeah. And I think it's just, created a bigger market. Some of our larger recent projects showed that there's actually a shortage in the illicit market because there's such a high demand for cannabis illegally.
We have pictures and videos of some tremendous sized grow ops that you folks had taken apart. Hopefully we'll flip to those here. I mean, these are just massive.
Yes, and the footage you're seeing here is from some licensed grow ops, licensed through Health Canada. The issue in relation to organized crime in that perspective is what has happened is a lot of our people who we used to investigate illegally producing cannabis have sought out and received licenses through the Health Canada medicinal regime. They've been able to effectively pick that legislation apart, find the loopholes, what organized crime does, and then they exploit that. So they've exploited the medicinal cannabis regime to allow them to obtain licenses either fraudulently or legitimately, and then they abuse the loopholes. So they take these licenses and they'll pool them together at addresses. So instead of having a small amount of cannabis produced for the medicinal regime, it turns into basically a cannabis factory. Wow. So in the cannabis legislation, the access to cannabis for medical purpose regulations is split in two parts. And the first part is for the big cannabis producers, all the large companies or corporations that people are running around and investing in right now. Right. They're the bricks and mortar companies that are actually investing millions of dollars in infrastructure, training, personnel. and they're heavily regulated by Health Canada. The designated producers, which is the individuals who can either grow for themselves or for somebody else,
Right.
they don't have to follow the same stipulations. And they're not regulated as much as the
Right.
Part 1 people are, the bricks and mortar companies.
Right.
So with no oversight, they're kind of running amok, and is exactly what they're doing. They're taking advantage of the situation.
Sure.
And they are abusing the system and producing, well, in our last project, all of the cannabis they were licensed to produce was going to the illicit market. None of it was going where it was supposed to
Okay,
go.
so they were licensed in whatever fashion. Doesn't even matter how they got their license, but they were licensed for a medical grow operation.
Yes.
And none of that was actually being used for the municipal market.
None whatsoever, no.
That's incredible.
So
But that's what organized crime does.
Well, and exactly. That's exactly what organized crime does. You can see by the footage that we saw,
Yeah.
those big, massive farms, and they're turning these large agricultural farms into these massive grow operations.
Yeah.
And they're doing it right in greenhouses. It's not hidden. And they're just mass producing for the illicit market, whether it goes onto the street here in Canada or a lot of it is destined to the United States for export.
Yeah, of course, it's not just a local market, is it?
No, and our country having a lot of international ports, we definitely export controlled substances.
Oh, see, I don't even think of that part. Like, you know, when I see video like what we just seen with the grow up, I'm assuming that's in one of our marshland areas and it's staying relatively local to our area, but that's not necessarily the case.
No, organized crime is very diversified, and they're provincial, national, and international. So it could be going to the United States, but it could also be going out of the country to another country.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, again, like you said, they're well connected, and we talk about that in other conversations, whether it be with the auto or the cargo, where you know, a car's taken today and ends up in Portugal 3 days later.
Yes.
It's I guess I never put the connection with the cannabis market.
Well, if you think of, you're probably more familiar with the cocaine trade,
Yeah.
And the exportation and movement
Sure.
of cocaine, whether it starts in Colombia, comes up through South America and the United States and then into Canada. Cannabis is no different, so
Right.
it moves the same routes, the same way.
If you can make money, that's what it's going to be.
Well, and we know from our last project that they're making a lot of money on cannabis, a lot of money, probably as much as they are in other synthetic drugs.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Right. And earlier on, we were talking about, you know, the rules changing, and there's been so much confusion over what the rules are. I'm very well connected to York Regional Police. I still don't understand the frameworks of the rules. It must be boggling for you guys.
Yes, it's probably one of the most challenging pieces of legislation we've ever seen, because it's a hybrid law, meaning it covers both federal and provincial offenses, and it's based on really a set of certain facts and circumstances.
Right.
So you may be at one point breaching a federal piece of the legislation, or you may be at one point under a different circumstance breaching a provincial, and depending on how much cannabis you have, what your age is, there's a whole bunch of factors, and so yes, it's a difficult legislation to navigate.
Yes.
It's very challenging to our officers. Requires significant amount of training.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
it's here to stay, but it's definitely one of the most challenging pieces.
Well, no, and that's a conversation that we've had on the show, is the amount of training. Actually, I had the Police Services Board Chair, Virginia Haxton, on, and we were talking about how much had to be invested in York Regional Police for that training. And not just from the Organized Crime Bureau, but frontline as well. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
Right, and that too. We've spoken to frontline officers, and I'll grab a graph and show just this, how much training goes in, and trying to understand what the officer needs to know at the roadside. It's absolutely incredible.
It is very, very technical and very, very
Yeah.
difficult to navigate. I would say the frontline officers have extensively more training than the Organized Crime Bureau because they're dealing with it on the road and with the public. We don't deal with the public a whole lot in the Organized Crime Bureau in a uniform perspective. We're more investigative, and really hasn't changed a whole lot for us. Trafficking is still trafficking, and producing is still producing. So just the quantities and types of substances might have changed slightly.
Yeah, and that's one thing, it changed slightly. It's not like cannabis is new to us. It's not like the marijuana market is a new product. It's just, I guess it's just how it's being handled now, right?
Yes, cannabis has been around forever, and we've investigated it for as long as there have been drug units. So what has changed now is instead of all the illicit or illegal grow ops that we used to traditionally investigate for many years, now it's licensed grow ops, and these grow ops are either fraudulently obtaining licenses, or they're abusing the license regime and they're overproducing, or they're just producing solely for the illicit market.
Yeah. So, and you're on your end, you're going to see from both sides of that fence, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like the illicit market. I guess I sometimes have a hard time wrapping my head around, people obtaining these licenses, how those licenses are obtained, and how they end up getting used, right? But on that note, we're going to take a quick break. Folks, we'll be right back after this. Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our conversation with Detective Sergeant Doug Bedford and cannabis in our region. I have a feeling that this show could go on for a very long time. And why I pause so many times is I'm not sure which question to ask next because there's so many.
Right.
We were talking off air about cannabis isn't just grown for one purpose.
No, it's just like any other commodity. They want to use it to its fullest extent. So when cannabis is produced, primarily it's produced to get the bud so they can usually smoke it. But now they're putting the cannabis in edibles and food. They're taking the oil out, the THC, and they're putting that into drinks. They're putting it into other edibles.
We have a quick video that we can run on some of the packaged products that.
Right.
That,
and, this was a search warrant that was done by the Organized Crime Bureau on.
So this is all masked as.
This is a legal dispensary. This is not a legal one. So currently edibles are not legal in Canada. Okay. And all dispensaries, unless they are government run, are also illegal to operate.
Right. And noting that this particular show is being taped September 24th of 19, and there is, my understanding is there's some framework coming out for the edible products in October of 2019?
Yes, we're supposed to.
But we don't know what that is yet.
We're supposed to know. We don't have that legislation rolled out yet. It's coming this October, and we'll see how that rolls out.
So as of today's date, edibles are actually illegal?
They are illegal.
Oh, interesting. They didn't look very illegal on the...
Well, there is a market for that, and as you're probably aware, there's been a lot of dispensaries across our region, Toronto, across Canada. Law enforcement has enforced the laws and shut a lot of those places down. Some of them like to pop back up again, but any dispensary that is operating right now without either a government license or run by the government is completely illegal.
Wow. Yeah, we've been reading a lot of that in the news, and you're right. They're all over. I've seen a couple of shops, particularly in the Toronto area, where they get shut down today, and they're open back up 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Yeah,
and the Toronto Police Service and other law enforcement are taking steps to mitigate that. The OPP Provincial Cannabis Enforcement Unit as well. So there is enforcement measures in place to deal with those issues, and they're doing a good job at that.
Yeah, and you just struck on something when you said the OPP Enforcement Bureau with regards to cannabis and organized crime. There's had to be a lot of money invested because of the legalization of cannabis.
From the police perspective? Yes. Oh, definitely. It's cost our budgets a significant amount to train everybody. There's a lot of manpower now being utilized, and not just police. You have the fire service. You have the Office of the Fire Marshal. You have the bylaw enforcement.
Yes.
So there's a lot of levels now from municipal right up into provincial policing that are engaged in this enforcement action. So yes, it can be fairly expensive.
And that, when you talk about municipal and what have you, and the Office of the Fire Marshal, one thing to note is not all of these grow ops are run in a safe manner.
No, seldom are they run in a safe manner. Like I said in the beginning, the bricks and mortar company corporations, most of those are compliant, and they're actually very clean. They're professional, and they've invested millions of dollars in those companies. It's either the illicit grows or the most of the medicinal ones that I've been to that are. Yeah, they're hodgepodge, patched together, and most of them are unsafe and not very pleasant to be in.
Okay, so just a question I have to ask. I'm not sure if it's an easy answer or not. If it's not, that's okay. But from the time that the marijuana is processed from a grow up, whether legal or illegal or what have you, how does that now get into Johnny's hands on the street?
Well, the organized crime, what they do is they grow these large scale operations. They harvest the marijuana, and then they process it. So the main thing they're after right now is the buds, so they trim all that off the plants. But like I said, they don't waste that plant. They use everything. So all the clippings, the stalks, everything gets ground up. They utilize that because there's still THC in that product. So whether they're making things called cannabis resin or shatter, so they extract the oil out of all that leftover stuff and use that to make a substance. They really don't waste any part of that plant. And once the bud is dried, it's packaged and ready to be sold, usually in bulk form, pound or half-pound packages, and then it's sold through the illicit market, which that rolls out to your mid-level dealers who then piece it off and deal it off to the street level.
And then this is how little Johnny on the corner ends up with his 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Joints, right?
There's a lot of layers in organized crime, no different than most businesses.
Yeah, and everybody in those layers is making their dollar on it.
Everybody's got a cut.
Everyone's got a little piece of it. And you just brought up a good word, and the word cut is a very popular term when it comes to especially the illicit market, is you don't necessarily know what you're getting, do you?
Well, yeah, this isn't like you go to the grocery store and you buy milk. You know how that milk is produced, right?
Yeah.
And everybody produces it the same way, to the same standard.
And you know that it's been produced in a safe and sanitary environment.
Exactly, and it's safe, it's sanitary, it's inspected, it's regulated. This market's completely unregulated. Health Canada does, for the medicinal side, set THC levels. They have a ceiling for the THC limit. But outside of that, there's really not a whole lot of testing. There are some pesticide tests and that, again, into the medicinal side. But on the illicit side, there's no checks and balances.
Of course not.
There's no quality control.
No.
They don't wash the lettuce like they do at Loblaws.
No.
So whatever they put on those plants out when they're growing, whether it's indoors or outdoors, stays on there, and that will get ingested when it's being used.
Yeah, the pesticides, fertilizers, whatever they're using on the plants.
Exactly.
It's just going to stay, and that's what little Johnny's getting on the corner.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. All of that stuff goes into your body, so it's kind of a gamble every time, and you may seek out a substance that you had it previously, but there's no guarantee you're going to get the same thing.
No. Well, we had the same conversation with Sony Desange when he was in drug enforcement.
Yes.
And that was regarding opioids and fentanyl. It was the same conversation. You don't know what you're getting.
No.
In that case, inherently, there was deaths.
Oh, very much so, and then that's unfortunately that opiate crisis has only continued and gotten worse across the country. So it is basically Russian roulette when you get into synthetics and opiates. Your first time might be your last.
Wow, that's a scary statement right there.
Yes.
That's quite the caption. First time might be your last, right?
Yes, it's unfortunate. Even recreational people who maybe try something here and there. Not that we condone that, but it's like I said, it's your first time could be your last.
Wow, that's scary. Now, as far as your enforcement piece goes, obviously you have other relationships, other partnerships with other agencies.
Oh yes, very much so.
Right, so other law enforcement agencies and the government themselves, right?
Yeah, we work hand in hand with a lot of law enforcement agencies across the province. We work very closely with, other police services. We work closely with the fire marshal's office. We work closely with our bylaw and our fire services, EMS. So we work hand in hand with pretty much all emergency services.
Yeah, and it has to be. It's much the same as with many of the units that we talk about on this show. Is all those partnerships just enhance the service that you're offering, right?
Yes, absolutely. They're integral stakeholders that we all carry a piece of the pie, and when we put it all together, it makes for a very effective group of people when we come together.
Yes, I alluded earlier that for myself, I always think of the smaller market, being York Region, but of course it's much broader than that, and you even brought in that it's actually on the world stage.
Oh, absolutely. Drug enforcement is not a localized issue. Drug enforcement is a local issue, but it's a provincial issue, it's a national issue, it's an international issue. Organized crime utilizes controlled substances to make a lot of money, and they always have, and it's our job to try and infiltrate and disrupt those groups and put a stop to it.
Earlier when we were talking, and you're saying infiltrating, but earlier when we were talking, like we said, cannabis has always been around. Marijuana is not new, but it has changed how your unit would police organized crime with regards to marijuana.
Yeah, it's changed somewhat, not a lot, but somewhat. We've always looked at organized crime in relation to the illicit production of marijuana, so that's nothing new.
No.
And we were doing it 10 years ago when it was illegal grow ops in houses all over the region and the country.
Right.
Now there's not so many of those, and they've, like I said, they've infiltrated that cannabis medicinal regime, and they now abuse those licenses that they can get from the government to feed the organized crime groups. So it's essentially almost the same people, just doing it a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's right. And then earlier you referred to recreational. People now are allowed, my understanding is, to grow a certain amount at home.
That's correct. Yeah, you can under the Cannabis Act, you can recreationally grow up to 4 plants per residence.
Is it per residence or per person?
Per residence.
Per residence. So 5 people in a house doesn't mean 20 plants?
No.
Or 25 plants?
No, it's per residence, and 4 plants is a significant amount of cannabis, and that certainly should satisfy most people's recreational use.
Right. And then the other option is, at least for the medicinal side, is you can order it online through the Ontario government.
Well, medicinally, yeah, you can get a script through your doctor, or recreationally, you can go to the Ontario Cannabis Store, which is the online. Oh. And now there's companies getting licenses to open up their own stores. There's been some lotteries.
I've been hearing about it, yes.
So a lot of those business licenses have been issued. Not all those stores are open. Some are, but a lot of those are in the works of starting up.
Right. So a lottery system. So this is a relationship between potential vendors and the Government of Ontario. Yeah,
the Ontario AGCO, Ontario Gaming Commission of Ontario, they're the ones that regulate the licensing. Okay. So they're the ones that did that lottery system. So law enforcement really has no say or no part in that. Okay. It's up to them to issue that.
And then I guess that's up to the individual municipalities as to whether or not they want to accept having a sale point, I guess, in their community.
Yes, and then again, that goes down to each municipality can make up their own bylaws and zoning and all those kinds of issues, which again is not based in law enforcement. So
No, it's really not under your umbrella.
No.
Obviously, you'll find out where these places are to keep your eye on them.
Yes.
But to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, absolutely.
And there's varying conversations on whether a town or municipality wants to accept having a cell point in their community, right?
Absolutely, and that's a conversation that I encourage the community to have with their elected officials.
Sure.
And it's something a lot of people need to get educated on and learn a little bit more about.
Absolutely. Doug, it's been great having you on the show. I certainly look forward to having you on again.
Okay, thank you.
Folks, that wraps up this episode of Policing York Region. Been great having you. Look forward to seeing you again.